Well, um, it's my pleasure to welcome everybody to the first of our series of Getting to the Music of Ernest Bloch, a series where we hope that people who are hoping and thinking of performing Bloch will have some opportunity to really learn from the wonderful musicians, conductors who have done, who will give them that.
You want me to put in headphones?
Um, so it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, young American conductor Jacob Schnitzer. He's artistic director of the Chamber Orchestra, Density 512 in Austin, Texas, and assistant conductor of the Missouri Symphony Orchestra. He has recently performed the sacred service twice with the Kent State University Orchestra and choirs. And Jacob will be giving us an inside look on a choral orchestral masterpiece and to share about a real life process to bring the sacred service into performance. So please unmute Jacob, and we're all yours. And you may want to put your view onto speaker view, in which case you'll see Jacob nice and big. Over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Geraldine. And before we get going, I'd like to introduce two other folks who will be joining us today in this presentation. The first is Cantor Vladimir Lapin, who sang the soloist role in the sacred service, and you'll get to hear him. So hi, Vlad. And the other is Dr. Brett Peppo, who was the choral director for the performances and brought the choirs together, taught them their parts, so that way when we came together, they were all ready to go. So thank you, Brett, for being here as well.
Excellent.
So the way we'll structure this is by playing little pieces of each of the 5 parts of the sacred service, interspersed with a few topics of discussion: score study, what it's like to be a cantor learning the role, what it's like to bring the choirs and the orchestras together, and then what it's like to grapple with the 5th part, which is, I think, the most deeply personal and most challenging piece of the puzzle when putting on this work. I'll just share a little bit about the performance, and then we'll go in and hear what it sounds like. So we started thinking about this almost a year ago, when Brett and I had both been hired on at Kent State to serve interim positions with the orchestra and choir department respectively. And we wanted to find something to bring all of the orchestra, all of the choral members, and the larger community together. Kent State is about an hour south of Cleveland, which has a very large Jewish population. And one of the benefits of doing the sacred service is it allowed us to connect not only from Kent State, but to Cleveland and the Jewish community at large, and also with Ernest Bloch's legacy. He was the founder of the Cleveland Institute, has deep roots in Cleveland, and so it just felt right to do this piece. Dr. Peppo knew a friend who knew Vlad and reached out to Vlad and said, hey, would you be interested in doing this? And we started to join forces. The student body at Kent State is a mix of music majors and non-music majors. So for instance, many of the viola section are fashion design students, or we had a student who was studying to be a pilot. people that from a lot of different backgrounds. And one of the reasons we chose this work is because while it is an enormous lift emotionally and musically, technically, in terms of just the notes and rhythms, is very accessible, to young musicians, but also a big lift, also a big push for them to learn and grow and go somewhere deep. So I won't say too much more for now. Let's go ahead and listen in on the first part of the sacred service. You'll hear the very beginning and the very end of the first part, and then we'll talk a little more about the piece as a whole. Okay, so that was our warm-up, so to speak, of this. So I thought a way to start of thinking about this was just to, start from the point of view of somebody trying to break into this massive work for the first time. And all I can do is share what it was like for me. So we'll start with that. Because the work is about 50 minutes long, it's a massive amount of music. It's a massive amount of text, and it's just a big musical lift for everybody. And one thing that always helps me is to try to figure out from the bird's eye view, in the big picture, what is going on here? How many chunks of music are there? What's the structure of the work? And what questions are going to come to fruition about how this is all going to play out based on the bird's eye view of it? So I'll show you what I like to do in order to get started is I start with these big formal charts. And can everybody see this? It looks like some bubbles, like a graph. Is that there? So this is a computer program called the Variations Audio Timeliner. This is just an image on it, but when I actually use it, if you click into any one of these little bubbles, you can actually play music. So you can essentially link in real time, like what it sounds like and how big things are actually proportionally. This is my graph for the sacred service. If you look at the little pink bubbles, you see there's part 1, there's a part 2, part 3, part 4. Then we get into some funny territory in this big part 5, which should set off some alarm bells right away that something is going on there. So I started by making this, figuring out what the big picture timeline of the work would be. And then at some point I went to Vlad and at the synagogue where he works, and he was able to set me up with a copy of this Union prayer book right here, which is the Union prayer book is well, actually, before I say this, Vlad, would you like to share what the Union prayer book is? I think you would be more of an expert than me.
Hi, everybody. I really are so wonderful to be here with all of you. Um, I served congregation Anshe Chesed Fairmount Temple in Cleveland, Ohio, which is a synagogue that is almost 200 years old. And we're in the process of merging with another synagogue that's almost 200 years old, the Temple Tifereth Israel also in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. And so as Jacob was preparing, as we were both preparing to perform this Bloch masterpiece, we were going through archives. The Union Prayer Book is one of the prayer books that was used by the Reform movement in the time, and it was the source material for the prayers for the sacred service. And so I found one that we had from 1930 or 1920, I think, which we believed would be the one that, not the actual book, not the prayer book, but the same text that Ernest Bloch would be using for the text of the piece.
And we'll get much deeper into this issue later. But the first thing that came to mind is the piece is based off of the Saturday morning Shabbat service. And for the most part, it follows the text liturgically with some cuts, but basically in order. All of the parts of the service are represented through part 1 and part 2, which is the Shacharit and Kedusha service. Then parts 3 and 4, which are taking out the Torah and returning the Torah. And then right around part 5, we close the service. And this Odon Olam bit doesn't fit actually. It doesn't come from the Saturday morning service like everything else. And early on, that set off these big alarm bells. Like, what is going on? Why did Ernest Bloch, in his sacred service, pull text from somewhere else and put it here? And we'll be pointing to that question later and later. One of the benefits of working with these bubbles is that it helps me structure rehearsal time. In other words, because we have these three big portions of parts 1 and 2 being together, parts 3 and 4 being together, and then part 5, and they're roughly the same proportions, it helps me know that in our rehearsal, we need to spend roughly a third on each of them in terms of how our time goes. So I delved into the text. Here's my copy of the sacred service. And a lot of the work here was analyzing harmonies, marking cues, figuring out what instruments are coming in where. There are a lot of recitatives. So I spent a lot of time, you can see right here is one of the recitatives. I spent a lot of time singing and studying and trying to just get a sense of how the thing flowed. And there were a few issues that came to light. One of them is this motive, lo ti ti ta tum tum, that happens everywhere. It's the very first thing you hear. It's comes in little bits and pieces. It's transformed and turned to something else. And I went, that motive has to be something. The other thing was to try to figure out what the role of the cantor is in relation to the role of the chorus. How do they work together? And then getting a sense of the both the details and the big architecture to try to make some meaning out of all of this. On that motive, what I found is that Bloch says himself that this motive is based not from Jewish tradition, it's based off of the Catholic Sanctus. I know, the Catholic Sanctus in a Jewish sacred service. And the reason he said is that he believed that it may have been derived from the old temple itself. This idea of taking this historical building block of the core of Jewish history transformed through also the Christian tradition and then built into this big humanistic work. And what I found is that the role of the cantor in the chorus is what one might expect, that the cantor is in an authoritative role, doing a lot of telling, doing a lot of sharing, and the chorus role is a lot of responding, a lot of grappling, the role of the community, the role of the congregation. And this again plays out very vividly in the Adon Olam in part 5, which we'll spend a lot more time talking about. Before we move a little bit into the next passage, I also would like this to be an interactive thing. Are there any questions or any thoughts about this score study process and how it happened in this? This is a good time, and we'll try to do some back and forth as this goes. So any thoughts?
If anybody would like to unmute, there have been a few notes in the chat that people say that Adon Olam is sung at the end of every Shabbat service in wherever we are, certainly in Britain, in Orthodox and Reform synagogues. So that's something that caught people's ears.
Oh, good. Yes. So where it exists in the Union Prayer Book, which is the text that Bloch consulted and the text that we went back to, is that it appears at the end of the Friday night service. So it's Shabbat, but in the evening. Cantor Lappin, is that your understanding as well?
Right. And so in the prayer book, it would have been in the Friday night service, not the Saturday morning. Saturday would be concluded with with the Yigdal prayer. And in the Saturday morning, in the sacred service, Bloch also uses the Friday night text for the Micha Mocha section. He doesn't use the Saturday morning version. He used the Friday night. So that's like another small discrepancy in using this as a Saturday morning sacred service rather than Friday. Yeah.
And the inclusion of the Torah service makes it very clearly a Saturday morning structure. Yes.
Very interesting, because in most synagogues in the United Kingdom, Friday night services end with Yigdal and Saturday morning with Adon Olam. I don't know if anybody else wants to come in.
I also want to. I see that Cantor Benjamin Meisner is on this call, and I want to just bow my head before you, Cantor, who's a hero of mine. I'm so grateful that he is here. A wonderful teacher and teacher of teachers to many, many Cantors.
Great. You see. Lovely to have Benny. Benny, you heard that, Benny?
I hear, but I don't believe it.
Well, this just reminds me of the joke about putting three rabbis in the room to try to figure something out, and you come out with four opinions. It seems like the quintessential conversation. So yes, I appreciate the controversy, and let's keep up the argument, shall we? Before we go into talking about what it's like as a cantor to prepare, I'd just like to play a little bit of the second part, which features, and I remember having a conversation with Walter Simmons, who's on this call, about the question of, well, if you're doing the sacred service, do you want to find a trained classical singer, or do you want to find a cantor to sing the role? And we were in the lucky circumstance of Cantor Lappin being both a trained opera singer and a cantor. So you'll get to hear his terrific singing. And we'll go into a little bit of part two.
Can I add some thoughts to what you're saying?
Please.
I had a great experience several times with the Bloch Sacred Service. I've done it with piano, with organ, and with the full orchestra. And as a cantor, I did not elaborate or change or even give any nuances of a cantorial approach to it. But I had a quite unpleasant experience once, because I sang it in in Bulgaria as a token and appreciation to the Bulgarian people that saved 60,000 Jews. It was with the Sofia Symphony, and the conductor was no one else than the pianist of the Vienna Orchestra. And first of all, it's written for baritone, and the great performance of it, of course, is Robert Merrill, one of the first recordings of it. But the conductor that was there, also from Israel, there were three choirs, one of my choirs, and a Varna choir, which is beautiful, of course, and also an Israeli Tel Aviv chamber choir. And the conductor of the Tel Aviv choir told me, "Benny, you sing it like a canto." I said, "But because I'm a conductor too, I conducted as well. But it really came to me that you need to sing it like a Hebrew-speaking person rather than anybody that just executes the the notes." I also learned that it's for a baritone, and I'm a tenor, so many cantors love to sing it because it's a magnificent words, And if you're a tenor with a low range, it's okay. You know, you don't sing mat, oh, but you sing mat, oh, you sing it a little more lyrical. So, as myself, I'm just saying it as a self-criticism. I decided not to sing the Bloch Sacred Service with an orchestra because you need a microphone and it's a classical piece of music. And it could not be with a 200 voice choir, a 90-piece orchestra with a poor tenor who sings low notes. So it's a paradox because on one hand, it's a beautiful piece of liturgy. I've done it in a synagogue many times, and there, again, I didn't change any of the notes, but there were inflections of a cantor, and being in Israeli and Hebrew is my language. Anyway, I just thought I would my thoughts for today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, great to learn from all of you. And thank you for sharing that. So we'll dip into, now this is some excerpts from part 2. And the reason why I wanted to select that little bit is it shows just a little bit of the relationship between cantor and chorus, that Cantor Lappin really set a lot of style and emphasis and a lot of shape that is often imitated. And we found that when Cantor Lappin was in the room, it made it easier for the chorus to know what to do. So Cantor Lappin, can you share a little bit about what it was like to learn the part and
Sure.
approach this?
Thank you, Jacob. It was so I am a graduate of the Hebrew Union College School of Sacred Music, from where I was ordained a cantor, which is the Reformed Seminary for cantors in New York City, and as part of my practica, I was ordained in 2017, but in 2013, I got to perform really small excerpts of the Bloch as part of my practicum. One of my assignments was to do a contemporary Shabbat repertoire, the Sabbath repertoire on a Friday night. And I chose the Shema and the Shema, the Hafta section of this, which is the part of part 1 and 2 of the Bloch Sacred Service. And I did it with piano and I think it was 8, very much reduced, 8 choir singers. So there was 8 members of the choir, and it was organ. I'm sorry, it was organ and piano, organ and 8-person choir, and that kind of set my journey on my love for this piece and the hope that one day that I will be able to perform this in a much grander, bigger way. And so when the call came, when the connection came from Brett, a mutual friend, Cantor Lee Korn, between Cantor Lee Korn works with Dr. Brett Peppo, who was the interim director of the Kent State University Choir, that there was an opportunity to perform this with orchestra, choir, and an incredible conductor, Jacob Schnitzer. I jumped at the opportunity, and so I engaged in real vocal exercises to ensure that my voice was in optimal condition. I started working with a coach at the Cleveland Institute of Music, where Ernest Bloch's name is very prominent as being one of the founders. And so I felt very much aligned in like this was meant to be. It was very, very special. And also I wanted to create an opportunity for this work, this incredible work, to be performed in a synagogue space. And we were able to, because my synagogue is right now in part of a merging moment. We're merging with the Temple Tifereth. The Temple Tifereth's original building is not far from the Cleveland Institute of Music. It's only a couple of blocks. And it's been repurposed. It's right now the synagogue has moved to the suburbs, but the building itself still serves as a synagogue, and also it's part of the Case Western University Performing Arts Center. And so it's become this really wonderful. They've invested, I think, almost $20 million into this incredible performing arts center that also serves as a synagogue for special events for the Temple Tifereth Israel. And so we were able to secure that spot as one of the performance spaces for the Bloch Sacred Services, for the Bloch Sacred Service. And to be able to sing this piece in a synagogue on such a large scale way, really there are no words that can give it justice. It was monumental in being able to do this. This whole opportunity was just a profound experience. The power of this music and the text really allowed me to connect with the audience, with the congregation, and really created, I think, an emotionally charged atmosphere. And it was a privilege to perform this work that holds such a cultural and spiritual significance. It's not just a musical composition. This piece is not just a musical composition. It's really a means to convey the rich heritage and really profound spirituality of this music. And what I found to be really powerful is in this moment right now in the United States, in the conclusion of the semester for a lot of the college students all over the country. And we've had a lot of protests given all this, given the conflict and the war in Gaza. And to hear, and experience students singing a Jewish work was really, really powerful. And it's something that I'm not going to soon forget. The preparation process was rigorous. It was deeply fulfilling. It allowed me, I think, to grow both technically and emotionally as a singer. And I think as a cantor, I felt I had a huge responsibility to do it justice. I wanted to make sure I did it the piece justice. And the performance itself, we had 2 performances, as Jacob mentioned, was a powerful moment of connection, not just with the music, but clearly with the cultural heritage that it represents. And I'm forever grateful for this opportunity. And I look forward to hopefully have another chance like this to sing this beautiful piece again. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question that I've never asked you before and would love to know the answer to?
Go ahead.
I mean, it is such a big lift for you to sing it. What is it like for you to summon up all of the energy, all of the focus, all of the attention, like to get yourself ready to perform the work? And what does it feel like afterwards?
I kind of have to take myself out of it because it's not about me. And this is kind of my approach to prayer. I need to be able to allow folks to be able to get into I'm just the means, the person that allows others to find that path to prayer. And that's how I approached singing this piece. I'm not performing it, I'm praying it. And I think that really helped me emotionally really connect with the words and with this piece.
Terrific. And this would be a great question great time if anybody has any specific questions for Cantor Lappin about this. And we'll also have a Q&A at the end. But right now, I'd like to invite.
I'm sorry I won't be able
to
to stay to the end.
share.
I have to sign off for previously scheduled meeting, but I'm happy to answer any questions or happy to connect with you afterwards.
So this is your chance. Okay, then let's move ahead. Oh, please.
One of the things I really liked about your performance was that it wasn't this. It was. I mean, as much as I love Robert Merrill, it wasn't the standard. It wasn't the standard operatic sound. It was, to me, a real cantorial sound, which was new to me in that piece. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Benny, you were talking about as a tenor singing this piece. I don't remember when I felt as comfortable with a full piece as I was with this. I'm a baritone, and it felt like every note felt right. Every note was written like sat in the perfect place for my voice, and so it was like a glove that, and so I'm really grateful to have had that experience. It doesn't happen all the time with the music that we sing.
When did you graduate?
2017.
So how do you know me?
We met at a Jewish choral festival.
I see. Oh, of course. I was supposed to.
It was many years ago.
But listen, it was written for a reform service, of course, and on the West Coast, and there's really no East European kind of fluctuation and expression of traditional chazanut. But if your DNA has the background of traditional cantorial chant, automatically you will include some of those nuances that then just a singer. I've heard Domingo sometimes singing a Hebrew. I think it was a Paul Ben Chaim or one of the Israeli composers. You sing it as a cantor, but the inflection of the voice, of course, is individually for yourself, and you did a very beautiful job.
And before we move ahead to the choral work, I just one thing, Cantor Lappin, could you also share about some of the text, I guess, dialect changes that we made from what is in the print?
Oh, sure. So originally this was written in the Ashkenazi pronunciation. So certain words. So it's usually a difference between the S and the T and the A and the O vowel. And we decided to use it as if it would be used today in a service in a reform contemporary service, which would be using the Sephardic pronunciation, the way that you would hear it in Israel, as opposed to the Eastern European Ashkenazi text. That was a conscious choice from us to kind of experience as you would hearing it today in a synagogue, as opposed to hearing it in the 1920s, 1930s of the synagogue.
And so this was written into the choral parts, all of these changing things that were, final consonants that were written as S to T, changing some of the vowels, and they were passed to the chorus and worked on, which is a nice segue to talk about our chorus. So we had a chorus of, Dr. Peppo, was this about 120 singers? Is that about right?
Hello, everyone. Yes, I think there ended up being about 110 for the final performance.
And it was a mix of community singers, of student singers, and people from around the university. So before we talk a little bit about it, and we'll share about the choral rehearsal, and I'll ask Dr. Peppo a lot of questions, let's listen to the orchestra and chorus together. This is in part 3, from a little bit from the beginning and then a little bit from the end, which is essentially working towards taking out the Torah, a very big moment. That is, of course, an exciting end to the third part.
Just have to say,
Dr. Pepper.
wow. Wow.
All right. Well, Dr. Peppo, could you share a bit from the choral perspective, what it's like to work on this and bring everybody together around it?
Well, thank you for asking. It was this is probably the fourth or fifth time that I've done the block. Back in grad school. I'm a kid from a small farm town in Illinois. I probably never met anybody who was Jewish until I was 30 years old. I didn't sing anything in Hebrew until I was 30 years old, and actually went to grad school with Cantor Corn that Vladimir Lapin talked about, and we actually sang this piece, and we were singing baritone in the choir, and he just looked over at me and said, "You're killing my language." So I just that was my first experience singing something in Hebrew, and then later I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area where Cantor Corn works at Temple Isaiah in Lafayette, California, and then we became friends, and I started conducting the choir for the High Holy Days and stuff like that. So, and then we had a couple chances to do the performance again in the Bay Area, but so it's kind of difficult to get the work together in an academic setting, because first of all, this is 4 different choirs that they're coming together. So one of the choirs is the chamber, the chorale, the top ensemble of about 40 singers, and then we have a men's and a women's choir. And so what I did was the men's and women's choir only sang about a third of the work. So on something big like that section, they would sing. The chamber choir sang everything, and then I have a town and gown group that is about 60, 70 people, and that group is marginal at best, to be honest. So it was some tough music for them to learn, especially they probably have not sung anything in Hebrew before, and also the harmonies and the melodies just don't necessarily go like the typical stuff they're singing, like a Mozart mass or Haydn. So sometimes the voice leading is a little different. So it was challenging, but it was so nice to put all those groups together and have them experience something that large. And I just came in there for a year while they were looking for a new choral director. So the program is in transition. So, but I don't think they've done many large works together as a choral area. So that was exciting. I feel like if I do it a couple more times, I will have a good grasp of the Hebrew. And I just, every time I sing it, I love it more. And I also like the study and the preparation that Dr. Schnitzer put into it, because it was so meaningful for him. The phrasing was so gorgeous, the way that he attempted to do each phrase. That's where it is for me. I wish we would have had a couple more group rehearsals. We had one group rehearsal, and of course, because it's all these different choirs, we couldn't have everybody there, and we actually couldn't even be in the space that we were going to perform in. So we just had some logistical challenges on this particular instance. And I don't think I've ever had a choral orchestral work where we had a great perfect setup where we could have all the choir on risers, the orchestra in a perfect space, where they have enough space to play. So there's always challenges, but I hopefully I'm getting emails and texts from the students saying thank you so much for pushing us to do this, and that's meaningful, and I love that we did it.
And I mean, I think Brett is speaking to one of the, the challenging things about this work, and also one of the great reasons to do it, which is that it forces everybody involved to really come together, focused, have a lot of intention. And because there were so many choirs coming together to form the choir that you're listening to, and because the orchestra rehearses separately most of the time, it meant that the time that we spent together was very precious. And we had to each all be ready on our own and then get ready together. So, I mean, this might be a little bit, I don't know, less on the philosophical and less on the spiritual side of things, but I thought it might be interesting to just actually see what our rehearsal schedule looked like. So this is our tentative schedule for the sacred service. The choirs were working independently on their own through the weeks leading up to it. This is the orchestra schedule minus the first 3 rehearsals, which are on a different document. But we could see we're working essentially parts 3 and 4 together. Part 5 gets its own rehearsal. This is all just the orchestra. And then we had to spend a little more time on part 5 because it's so demanding. This is just the orchestra. Then right here on Wednesday, April 24th, we brought together for parts 1 through 3 as much of the choir as we possibly could, which ended up being about half of them. Then we did a little work on this day of the 26th, putting the orchestra together with Cantor Lappin, not the big choral parts, but the recitatives. Then on the 29th, we brought in again about half the choir to work on parts 4 and 5. And this Wednesday, May 1st, was the only time we had a rehearsal with the entire company together. So, we're working in all these little bits. And then right here on May 1st, what we did was we essentially would run a whole part and then go back and work on whatever we needed, and then move to the next part, run the whole thing, and then go back and touch on the little thing that we needed to, all the way through to the end. And the reason we did it this way is because the architecture is so big that once you're putting everybody together, you have to let the detail work go. You have to trust that it's either there, or if it's not going to be. We need to be feeling what the big architecture is like. And those little details would on each run work itself out. On May 2nd, we all jumped on a bus, went up to Cleveland, did our performance at the Maltz Performing Arts Center. Friday, we did no rehearsal. Everybody needed a break, sleep a little bit, Friday night, kick back. And then Sunday was our performance that you're seeing today. So that's a little bit of the nuts and bolts there. I went in 1 or 2 times with just the choir. And then, once we got together, it was just about getting everybody to listen to each other and know what all the parts were and try to get the whole big thrust working. Brett, anything important to add here?
Well, I will say probably there were probably only about 6 or 7 Jewish students that sang the piece. And I think for most people, it was very difficult to just get the overall picture or sound when you show the bubbles, just because they're rehearsing just a little snippet, or I'll say, go to rehearsal 30 and sing this, and we'll do 30 to 33. So you just don't get an overall picture of the work from the choral rehearsals. So I think a lot of the choir members were not frustrated, but they just didn't understand the piece at all until the performance. and especially for us who don't really know the service and what happens during each of these parts. So that's, that's great that we have this opportunity to learn a different culture, a different religion, and when I sing at the temple in close to San Francisco, I love asking the guy next to me. I said, "Okay, like what's happening now?" And I just love getting an explanation. So it's like we all need a little explanation of what's going on during the service.
Okay, so I'll play just a little more of the orchestra and choir together. This is from the end of part 4, the Eitz Chaim Hi, the Tree of Life. All right. Some beautiful music for sure. So, here comes the difficult part to talk about. And this is the why the talk is titled Grappling with God. And I'll caveat this with the intellectual humility of not knowing what Ernest Bloch really thought. but this is just the closest that I feel like I could come to understanding him. And I'll also caveat this a little bit with our discussion about the Adon Olam and where it is and where it isn't. And all I can say is that based on this text, which is the Union prayer book that he used, there are some questions. So let me pull back up these bubbles. Can everybody see this? And can you see my mouse moving around? Okay. So we just were right here at the Eitz Chaim, which is the return of the Torah. And we're about to go into the end of the service. And following the Union prayer book, the text of the service right here ends right at the end of this big bubble right here, leaving the whole second part of the fifth part not in the Saturday morning service. Now, the question of that that comes to my mind at, like, right at the beginning is, that's strange. Why? What is it that led him to structure the work that way? So what happens in here, if you're familiar with the work, there's this long recitative, not in Hebrew but in English, that is given not by the cantor necessarily. Often in the role, it's in the score marked as minister, and serves as a foil to the cantor, which is of course a very explicitly liturgical, religious, Jewish role, whereas the minister starts to take these big picture Jewish ideas and starts to make them more and more into the mainstream, a little more universal. And right here at the Sur Yisrael, which is a call back to the Sur Yisrael in part 1, is these two little node points from which the whole work is to change. We go into the Adon Olam, which, according to the Union prayer book, is in the evening service. And the question for that is, what is going on and why is it so long as compared to all of the other texts? And the only thing I could think of, the more I grappled with it, the more I felt it was his personal statement that he was trying to share, not the function of representing the Jewish liturgical service, not music that is for its function, but music that is for his personal expression of what he's trying to convey. And it's this like deep question of like, what is the meaning of this all? Why are we here? What is it that we're after? So I'd like to share with you the English translation of the Adon Olam from the Union prayer book. It says, "The Lord of all did reign supreme, ere yet the world was made and formed. When all was finished by his will, then was his name as king proclaimed. And should these forms no more exist, he still will rule in majesty. He was, he is, he shall remain. His glory never shall decrease. And one is he, and none there is, to be compared or joined to him. He ne'er began, and ne'er will end. To him belongs dominion's power. He is my God, my living God. To him I flee when tried in grief. My banner high, my refuge strong, who hears and answers when I call. My spirit I commit to him, my body too, and all I prize. Both when I sleep and when I wake, he is with me, I shall not fear." That's the text from the Union Prayer Book. And what I believe is that Bloch takes this text and bisects it, takes the first 3 stanzas, which are about God as an endless, formless, cosmic structure in which we all live, the mystery of it all. And then the second half being his personal relationship, his giving up to God, the release, the letting go, the trust of himself. And this plays out musically in the first half with this sort of gray chromaticism, this sort of mystery, these colors or textures that are just a little, I don't want to say strange, but striking, very individual, almost gray in color. And then midway through to this beautiful, lush, romantic outpour, these sort of 2 different musical palettes that reflect the pieces of the text. I'll pull out the page where it first begins, the Adon Olam. And what Bloch says the voices should sound like, he says, like voices from another world, outside of time and space. This is what this text looks like. And you can see, if you can, the note at the very bottom about the mystery that this is all going to be. So what I'd like to do to close is to do something maybe a little bit unwise, which is I'd like to share with you this Adon Olam to the end of the work, a long stretch of music that I feel we did the least justice to, that I feel like we didn't quite reach, that there's something ineffable about it that we couldn't quite put our fingers on, but I hope you'll hear the struggle in it. And I'm sharing this with maybe a little bit of comfort of there being no recording I've listened to, not the one with Bernstein in the New York Philharmonic, not the one with Jeffrey Simon and the London Symphony, nothing that I have heard that I feel like fully grasps and does true justice to this mystery. And all I can do is to share with you what it was like for us to grapple with it. And I hope at least you can feel some of the searching for it. And then at the end, we'll take question and answer. So this is the 5th part, about the last 10 to 12 minutes of the sacred service.
Wow. Uh, Jacob, what I'd just like to say on behalf of everybody is a huge congratulations to you. You know, to see the intensity and the emotion on the faces of all those young players and feel that they've all come together with, you know, your wonderful work and Dr. Pogba. It's just something that must have been magical on the day, you know, to be sitting either in the choir or in the auditorium or in the synagogue. It just must have been astounding. So I think a huge congratulations to you and your team, wonderful cantor, for putting this together in such a wonderful way and for describing it to us and showing us. I'm sure that there are people who'd like to say something. You know, there are people here who've also put it on, trained choirs, done everything. So it's really special to have had you here. And I wonder whether someone would like to unmute and say something. Perhaps Steve Schwartz says he wants to say something. And Malcolm Singer, if you're still here, I hope you would also do that. Let me just view it as a gallery and then I'll be able to see. Right. Malcolm.
Well, thank you very much, Jacob. I've met most of the people online, and I gave a talk 2 or 3 years ago about Yehudi Menuhin and Bloch, and anyway, I've done your job and Brett's job several times with the Sacred Service. we performed it with organ. We did it in York Minster with the Jewish choir, the Zemel choir, alongside the York Bach choir, which is wonderful. University choir, and then we did it I prepared the choirs with the Yehudi Menuhin conducting it in St. Paul's Cathedral. That Geraldine put that picture up of Suzanne Bloch, and I helped Yehudi prepare to conduct it. I've told the story before, so I won't now, about his connections with Bloch and his love of the work and working with Bloch. I think the thing that really interests me, which you haven't delved into at all, is about Cantor Rinder, who's one of my great mysteries in my life. So Cantor Rinder kind of discovered Yehudi Menuhin as a 2-year-old in the pram and said, "Oh, I think he can sing in tune. Why don't you give him a violin?" And he was also the man who organized the commission of the Bloch Sacred Service and gave that Judean prayer book to Bloch. And my guess is, and Alex Knapp may know, because I'm a composer and conductor, not a musicologist, but I guess that Cantor Rinder would have suggested maybe the Adon Olam to finish. I don't know. Of course, Bloch was commissioned in San Francisco, but he wrote the work in Europe, and it was first performed in Europe. So I think there's lots of questions over the actual writing. Alex is the expert about Bloch's very interesting connections with his Judaism and his psychological feelings about organized religion. But if the Adon Olam is that one moment where the choir sings in unison, Mysterioso triple P, but they're singing in unison. And really that part 5 is the one place where the choir gets a long stretch of singing. So Brett was talking about the problems of teaching it, and I can only empathize, because the choir, it's very bitty when you're rehearsing it, because the interaction between the cantor, the recitation, and the choir, it's exchanging all the time. So it's not like preparing a traditional Haydn or Mozart, Beethoven mass or what have you, because so it is frustrating for choirs, as Brett was saying, to see how they fit into the whole thing until they do it. But in that 5th part, he does give the choir a chance to have a long stretch of singing. So he may have done it as much for pragmatic reasons as for artistic reasons. I remember I've told this story before. Yehudi saying that when he heard Bloch play it through at the piano to him in the mid-1930s in Paris, he wished he'd said he'd written a kind of dies irae, a kind of angry moment. The whole thing is moderato, and he would have loved a really fast, angry moment where Bloch is angry with God. And you don't get that in the work. And also, Alex will also say, Susanna Bloch, I think, was was very displeased about what Bernstein did with that fifth part and his addition, because that was very much Bloch definitely wanted that recitation by a minister in English, I think.
And we did it the way it's in the print. When
Absolutely.
somebody, yes.
Yeah. We always do. Each time I've done it like that as well. So I thought the whole ruach, the whole atmosphere of the performance was just splendid and really intensely dedicated. So congratulations. That's my contribution for the moment, but I'm sure Alex will have a lot to say. But maybe you want to go to Steve Schwartz first.
Thank you. Steve Schwartz, and then Daniel Katz wanted to say something. So Steve?
The first thing is that why don't you go to Daniel Katz? It just left my head.
Okay. Daniel?
Okay, thank you. First of all, congratulations on the performance. I have one comment and one question. The comment has to do with the motive or cantus firmus, really, that comes there, is used throughout the piece. And I think what Bloch is trying to do here is to integrate Jewish liturgical practice with long time Christian and classical practice, because the motive is used by Bach, and it was old already in Bach's time. It's used by Mozart. And of course, the idea of a unified mass goes back hundreds of years. In the Christian tradition, Bloch is trying to bring this into the Jewish tradition, or bringing Jewish liturgical music into mainstream, or bring Jewish liturgy into mainstream classical music. The question is, when you were changing the pronunciation to present a Sephardi performance, Sephardi Hebrew, turning Ashkenazi Hebrew to Sephardi Hebrew entails more than just changing the consonants and vowels. It also entails rhythmical changes. So were you singing matovu or matovu? And what sort of changes did you have to make in Bloch's score in order to do this?
So I'll comment on your comment and then answer your question, which is, I think that you are absolutely spot on in identifying the roots of the concept of a unified mass as not coming from the Jewish tradition, but rather coming from the Christian tradition and largely like the Western choral orchestral tradition. And because of the rhetorical move of making a personal statement at the end of the work, I feel very strongly that while this is, of course, on surface a Jewish liturgical work, I believe that a huge portion of it is really a universal statement on the relationship of the human beings and the cosmos from wherever, we are situated as people. And I feel that thinking about it as just a choral orchestral work or just a Jewish liturgical work is maybe too confining for Bloch's grand aims in what he was trying to express. So I think you're spot on there. In regards to the pronunciation, the most of the changes that we made were about actually, I would say that 85 to 90% of the changes that were made were changing final consonants that were S to T, and changing some vowels from O to A. That was essentially most of the work. There were a few places, like you aptly mentioned, where there were some text stresses that we did adjust. And in order to handle the counterpoint in the proper way, we restricted those text stress changes to the cantor part, and only when it was not later imitated by the choir. So that way, everything that used large forces was notes and rhythm the same, and there were just a few alterations in the cantor part alone. And the reason that choice was made was a community reason, which is that we were going to be performing for 2 joint congregations in the Cleveland area and bringing this work to that Jewish community. And we wanted to sing it in a way that was familiar to the audience. It's like, I would say, if the English National Opera takes Wagner and sings it in English, we did like 8% of that much, of trying to bring it to the text that people might find familiar.
Thank you. Alex, do you want to come in now? Steve, have you made your point in the, or do you want to?
Actually, I just wanted to say that I've sung this piece twice in the chorus, Against All Odds, and I did it with an orchestra. And it was at Fairmount Temple, oddly enough. But the hardest part for us, this is when I was a teenager, so 60 years ago. The Adonna Lawn, I remember as being a bear for the chorus to sing, because it's quiet and it's sustained and it goes on. It's awfully hard not to run out of gas, for a choir not to run out of gas during that section. The other thing is that in the recitation of the minister, I noticed in the score that there are little notes above the words. Did you do that, or is it any good, or what?
Are you talking about in the score itself?
Yeah, at least in my edition, it had little notes that could be sung to those words.
Yeah, so what I found when flipping through the score was in the version that I have, there's both English and Hebrew transliteration, so the option to sing it in either language. And I found that a lot of the times these little notes above were essentially like rhythmic realizations of the English text. So it would allow some alteration to fit the translation into music, and made some recommendations on how to navigate that. Is that the kind of things you were talking about, or are you talking about little grace notes and these filigrees?
That's exactly what I meant.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and we talked about the possibility of singing the benediction at the very end in English, and we ended up choosing to take it in Hebrew. But I think that in the print, to have the option to sing in Hebrew or to sing in English for everybody, I think this really points to the universal intent of the work, that it can be understood in either language. And for our students, the bigger growing experience would be to sing it in Hebrew in the original text. And as an educational institution, that was our choice there.
Thanks. Alex.
Wow. Well, thank you. That was quite a roller coaster. It was fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for sharing it with us. Really grateful for that. And I think there were so many points that arise from your particular interpretation and your particular approach to it. I would just like to take them one by one, and then, I hope that there can be perhaps some discussion about those and other things too. The Gregorian chant theme, I think that was very deliberate on Bloch's part. He wanted to integrate, as everybody has said so far, a more universal approach to the composition of a sacred service in Hebrew, and so therefore he had said there are all sorts of references to this, that he wanted the sacred service to be sung not only in synagogues but also in churches and cathedrals and in concert halls, and he wanted it sung, you know, like throughout the world, because this was a universal message, and he was very clear that this was intended as a universal message, not just for Jewish people, but for the wider world, Christians, and indeed beyond. Beyond. The whole question then of that part of the part 5, where there is the prayer in English, he was very clear that he wanted that to take the place of what otherwise would have been the Kaddish in Aramaic. And he didn't want the Kaddish in Aramaic. He wanted this prayer, which he himself wrote. He wanted that in English or in any vernacular language where the work was being performed. So in France, it would be in French, and in Italy, it would be in Italian. He was very clear about that. And Bernstein, in his recording, replaced the English piece that Bloch had written, and he put the Kaddish in there instead. And I remember speaking with Suzanne Bloch about this, and she said that Bloch was really, really upset that that this had been done, or at least she was very, very upset. Maybe this was after Bloch had died. I can't remember exactly when that happened. But in any case, it seems to me that Bloch was quite clear that this was not an optional thing. This was something that he really wanted. And he wanted it done in a kind of Sprachstimme, or Sprechstimme, so that it was not exactly sung and not exactly spoken, but, you know, there was an undulation in the voice. As far as the traditional Nusach is concerned, there is plenty of Nusach throughout the sacred service, but it's very well hidden, except in the case of Tzur Yisrael. Tzur Yisrael is actually a cantorial chant, and it was given to him by Cantor Reuben Rinder, who's been mentioned already by Malcolm Singer and others. Tzur Yisrael was given to him very, very deliberately, and it's very interesting to see how Bloch harmonized Tzur Yisrael, because he did not actually harmonize it in the Ahava Rabbah mode, which one would expect to have it harmonized, because that is the mode of the recitative. It was harmonized in a very Western kind of sequence of chords. And I think, you know, it really is something that does repay some work. The question Ashkenazi Sephardic pronunciation is a vexed one. One comes across this all the time. I've seen so many improvements, as it were, of Ashkenazi Western classical compositions of the 19th century, where the accentuation and harmonization, accentuation and pronunciation are changed from Ashkenazi into Sephardi, or Sephardic Israeli, shall we say, in an effort to bring it up to date somehow. But it does play havoc with actually the composition that the composer wrote, because the composer wrote it with a particular interpretation in mind, which reflected the pronunciation and accentuation of the original, and so therefore there are many issues involved in making these changes. I'm sure you took care of those. I'm just saying, you know, that it's really a much bigger issue than just putting the accent in a different place and making an S into a T or whatever the other things are. There are lots of things that need to be taken sort of into account. And just finally, about the Adon Olam, and as you say, the grappling. Bloch apparently grappled with the Adon Olam enormously. Apparently, he took 1 year to compose everything else and 2 years to compose the Adon Olam. So in 1930, which is when he started it, to 1931, most of the piece was complete. 1931 to 33 was Adon Olam. It was an enormous labor for him. It was really something. I mean, there's correspondence and there are articles and things that he wrote about the problems that he had with it. And indeed, Adon Olam is sometimes regarded as a kind of congregational hymn which is tossed off at the end of the service, whether it be Friday evening or Saturday morning, but anyway, tossed off at the end of the service. And sometimes they're very frivolous arrangements of it, and sometimes medleys of different versions of Adon Olam to popular tunes. But for Bloch, Adon Olam was absolutely a central issue, not to his own personal religious belief as a Jew, because he wasn't a practicing Jew in the usual sense, but he had a strong sense of what you might call Jewish spirituality. And so therefore, the Adon Olam encapsulates a lot of Bloch's philosophy of life.
I'm learning a lot from you. Thank you. And I'm not surprised to hear that he spent so long working on it. And, you know, I think that labor comes through. I mean, whatever trying to tear his guts apart to figure out what that was going to be. I mean, we feel it when we're performing it as well. I just want to key in on one point that you brought up, which is the inclusion of the Tzur Yisrael, which is, to my knowledge, the only bit in the cantor part that is literally nusach, taken from the cantorial tradition. And in the vocal score, there is an option listed. For some reason, it didn't make it into the full score, but it's in the vocal score. There's a little asterisk at the Tzur Yisrael in its reprise in part 5 that says here, if this was performed in an actual service, this is the place where you would recite the mourner's couch.
Oh.
And we did not take that option because we were performing it as a concert work, but oh, yes, Malcolm has it right there. Yes. There, that text right at the bottom. Malcolm, would you mind raising it, showing us just the bottom of the score?
Yeah, I'm just unmuting as well. Don't know if you can read that.
Yes, it says, yes, that essentially the minister.
At the Tebas, the minister could start here in Hebrew, the Kaddish prayer. In such cases, chorus and cantor must sing all the following till the end of page 80, triple piano, and as far distant lamentation of all mankind. The answer to this lamentation, this cry for help, is then the Adon Olam. That's what it says, the vocal score.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting. Yeah, sure. And I'm just wondering whether that's an original Bloch statement or whether that's an editorial statement. I don't know.
No, I guess it's editorial. And my guess that, you know, the reason why you've got the English text is because the publishers wanted to get more performances. But I'm very cynical when it comes to these things.
Well, look, you know, this is a wonderful forum for you to be talking in, because you're talking about people dedicated and passionate about the music of Ernest Bloch. And of course, we welcome you as a person of that nature, and you've just proved it to us with this amazing performance and pulling everything together and putting so much investment into the emotionality and getting all these musicians, and to me, to see the intensity of the faces of the performers, both the singers and the instrumentalists. It was absolutely amazing. So, Jacob, may we all thank you very much again. It was a tremendous job you did, and thank you so much for sharing how it came about and the grappling that you had and your team had, and Bloch's grappling. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to meet you all. And if anybody wants to be in touch for anything, I'm sure Geraldine can help pass along contact info. And I'll be in Bayreuth through most of July. So if anybody will be around Bavaria, come say hi.
That's fantastic. So you're going to be studying Wagner in Beirut,
That's right.
which is absolutely wonderful. Next month, we're going to be connecting again. So we've got, Josh, do you want to say anything about next month's, which you're going to do together with Eric Johnson, about Bloch and the philosopher Stieglitz?
Yeah, but it's pretty much what it is. It's the connecting philosophies between the two and how the photographs do connect to the music. Roughly between right after he comes back from America, was it 1919, right? Roughly around there, and beyond. And we'll be discussing about showing photographs and trying to connect them to the piece of music that we're going to be showing. Probably have like 3 or 4 examples.
Sounds amazing. So we look forward to seeing you again next month if you're available. And there will be a recording of this on the Bloch YouTube channel so that you can dip in and refer to it again or send it to your friends or whatever. So thank you very much. I'm going to switch off the recording, but if anybody wants to say anything or talk, I don't have to shut the room.